Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Indie Publisher Bookstore podcast. This is J.R. Martin, and today I have with me Daniel Bayliss. Daniel, how you doing today, man?
I am very good. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Hey, not a problem. Thanks for being here. So you have a book out now currently called The Traveler, correct?
This is it, yes.
Awesome. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about this book. Give us the pitch, or just give us everything. Let people know about what the book is about and what inspired you to write this.
Sure. Well, it starts sort of with a decision I made a few years ago to tackle one of my biggest dreams, which was to go on a big trip to see the world. I think many people can sort of relate to that desire. I decided to do something a little bit more drastic in the sense that I left a job and a rent-controlled apartment to go and spend 1 year in the world. And I wanted to travel a little bit deeper, one might say, more meaningfully. So I went to 12 different countries over the course of 12 months. And in each of these places, I tried to find a volunteer or work exchange experience. So I could dive a little bit more deeper into local culture. I could potentially be a bit helpful. So I succeeded to stay on the road for those 12 months. And when I got back, I felt like I had the shape of a book, which we have now.
Awesome. Awesome. So, wow, that's actually a pretty interesting way of seeing the world. I've always said that myself, where you have a lot of people who go on vacations and they go to these hot spots, like Cozumel in Mexico, or Toronto in Canada, or, I'm going to London and London alone in England. And you realize that, okay, I've actually lived in a couple other countries myself, but you never get that full, true local experience of what's going on in that country if you don't take the time to stay there for a while and actually visit. And, I really find it funny when I'll hear people talk about, oh, yeah, I went there and learned a lot about local customs and, this or that place. And then, you find out that those aren't really local customs. That's just the things they do for the tourists.
Yeah.
So, right?
Yeah.
So what are some things that you found that kind of maybe you were enlightened on as far as, you go to a different country and things that you wouldn't normally see? What kind of things do you feel that you saw that the normal tourist wouldn't see?
Yeah, so I had specific experiences that I would never have had, should I have opted for a bus tour or something more conventional, let's just say. And that's not to downplay those options. Like, I've done those things as well, and in their way, they're lovely. So I definitely want to sort of put out a disclosure that I'm not poo-pooing on any other type of travel.
Right.
And some of my attempts to be helpful were actually failures, and I write about that. I'm quite honest with my projects, but when it was successful, it was awesome. And a couple experiences spring to mind. One is, being in Peru, in a smaller city that less foreigners would visit, and having like a private cooking lesson in a local woman's kitchen.
Wow.
Ranging to making friends with a guy in South Africa, and he took me to like a shanty town where he had lived for a period of time. So it's that level of sort of personal experience that I love, and I think we all really love when we go traveling. So I was in search of those. But like I say, I didn't always find them, and actually some of the funnier points in the book are when I'm failing miserably.
Right. No, I definitely understand that. That's very cool. So how were you able to find the successes, right? The successes that you had when you actually met up with people who you could have these personal interactions with. How did you find them? How did you get in touch with them to be able to take the cooking lesson or visit the shantytown?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's by chance, but I also used a couple of networks that exist online that connect volunteers and travelers with local projects that are happening on the ground. One of them is called helpx.net, and another one is workaway.info. Another sort of famous project that exists is called WWOOFing, and that's an acronym for Willing Workers on Organic Farms. So there are these networks that exist, and then while I was traveling, I would also just ask people of fellow travelers of where they've been, what they recommend, and oftentimes those personally recommended sites were the most were the greatest. They were sort of verified, one might say.
Right. So no surprises there. That traveling and having a surprise of who you're dealing with would definitely be very, very problematic. I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Africa. You mentioned Peru. What other places did you visit?
So yeah, I wanted to touch base on all six of the populated continents, one might say. So South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. And then I also spent a month in New Orleans in North America. I'm originally from Canada. I live in Montreal, but I wanted to include, my home continent in my tour as well.
And that makes sense. So you were visiting all these places. How were you just doing like working odd jobs to kind of make it from place to place, or how did you go about doing that for those listeners that we have that are travelers and looking for ways to get around the world?
Yeah, so my ultimate was to try to exchange work for food and accommodation, and that was what I was able to, that's what I did to keep the cost of this journey down, because traveling doesn't necessarily have to be expensive if you're willing to make certain compromises on luxury.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I was on a farm, like just doing basic labor work. I was at a festival in Edinburgh doing more administrative work. I was on a rebuilding project in the south of France, and also a couple schools and language programs. And sometimes I would pay maybe like $10 a day for accommodation to help subsidize the whatever NGO or organization was leading the project. And I wasn't opposed to that. But again, my sort of ultimate ideal was always to try to exchange volunteerism for food and accommodation.
Very cool. So you mentioned, sorry, I'm just going back in my mind here. So first off, that is a very interesting way of traveling the world. But I was thinking just now, you went to all these different places. What was it? Was there a language barrier, or you just happened to be fluent in multiple different languages? How was that?
There's often language barriers. I speak English, obviously, and a little bit of French, and that's pretty much it. But a lot of these host projects were able to communicate to me in English, and then once I was on the ground, there's folks speaking English, or the international language of like charades works really well. Like going back to the example of the cooking lesson, it was with a woman named Estella, and she didn't really speak any English, but we were able to communicate because we're cooking, and there's just so much communication that can happen without actual verbal words.
No, okay, and that I get you. I get you on that, because when you're cooking, you're measuring, you're looking, you're observing, you're checking temperatures. There's not as much communication or actual verbal communication that has to be done when you're cooking. So that is a very interesting. Wow, that's really cool. So what else did you? Is this something that you would recommend for others, or if you have some people picking up your book, do you kind of give examples of how to do these things and to do these travels like you did?
Well, to answer your first question, I of course recommend this type of travel.
Okay.
But I mean, it's really like if you want a type of grittier experience. Again, like I'm not staying in luxury resorts and there's no bar service, so um, one just needs to be prepared for that. But in terms of the book itself, I didn't really write a how-to manual. It's really a narrative. It's these are my experiences. But that said, if anybody has questions at the end, I'm totally available on email and Twitter, and I love to chat and help people formulate their own travel dreams.
See, and that's cool because I'm sure. Well, I don't know yet if you've had a lot of people reaching out to you for this, but I mean, I personally, if you know my opinion, I definitely think people should try this experience from what you're describing, just because it gives you that opportunity to live amongst locals, and then I mean, you never. I think it helps to walk a mile in another person's shoes, so to
Yeah,
speak, and to be able to go to France and help there, and to Peru there, and that is an amazing thing. That is actually very amazing, and it helps to bridge those, those communications gaps that we
for
have,
sure.
in this world. Because sometimes it's like we don't understand each other, right? Like I don't know what the person in Peru is thinking, right?
Yes,
I don't know what the person in France is thinking, but uh, it helps to actually broaden your own horizons and expand your mind and see things from not just a perspective of here I am in Canada or North America, but wow, now I have a more of a, even if it's a smaller part of it, but a broader perspective on how the rest of the world is doing and what's going on. Does that seem like a fair assessment?
yeah, and it doesn't have to be as drastic as what I did. Like you don't have to stop your life for a year.
Right.
It might just be like 2 or 3 weeks during your annual vacation. Um, And to add to that, I think the most important thing is just to sort of go in with an open mind and limit one's expectations. Like you might get the lesson, the private cooking lesson in a local's kitchen, or you might not also. And these are some of the risks that come with this type of travel.
Understood. So, Daniel, let's go ahead and move over to the experience of writing the book, and you self-published, correct? Or were you able to find a small indie publisher to publish you?
I self-published using my own vanity label.
Perfect. So, tell us about the experiences self-publishing your own book, writing it, getting it edited, and all those things that come with publishing in today.
Yeah, it was a big process. Um, when I got back from my trip, I knew fairly quickly that I wanted to dive into a book project. I asked a friend and a colleague who I'd worked with on a previous project, like a blog, if she would be interested in being my editor, and she agreed to that. So over the course of the next 16 months or so, I did a lot of writing. She did a lot of feedback. I did a lot of revisioning. And then it got to the point where I was ready to put it into the world, and that meant finding a cover design and a printer and somebody to do the interior layout. And then I launched a crowdfunding campaign. I got I requested $5,000 from my community. They ended up giving me $10,000, which was amazing. And then, yeah, the product came out, and it was a pretty amazing experience.
Very cool. So you're the first author I've heard of doing a crowdfunding campaign. I'm sure there's more, but I actually don't deal with I know crowdfunding, you have like Kickstarter and others.
Yeah.
How did the crowdfunding work to get the additional funds to help you write the book?
Yeah, I mean, to my, I guess, advantage, I had been blogging and fairly active on social media for the years leading up to the campaign. Even while I was traveling, I was giving sort of live updates on where I was and some of the stories. The book was ultimately a deeper look into my experience. So by the time I was ready to do a crowdfunding campaign, I felt like, or I think my community was really ready to support me. They had seen the evolution of my travels and now this project. So, and then I set the bar pretty low. I said this is basically the minimum money I need, and they exceeded that, which was amazing.
Excellent. And how have reviews been for the book so far? Mostly positive, mixed bag, or what have people been saying about the book?
Overall, it's amazing. I get, an email every couple of weeks or every month of some person somewhere in the world who has somehow come across my book, ranging from like my hometown to India. Um, so it's sort of taken on a little bit of a life of its own, which is fantastic. One of the challenges, however, as an indie writer, is getting those reviews. I got a decent review from the Montreal Review of Books, which was sort of the local review body. So, and then of course, friends and family are very supportive. So,
Right. That's great stuff right there. And so we have the so we have the book, you're getting the reviews. Are you only listed on Amazon, or are there other places you've also listed the book?
the book is available, the print copy via Amazon and a couple of bookstores across Canada. And then digitally, it's on Kindle, Kobo, iBooks, and via Google's platform as well.
Okay. And how you find it working with each one of those platforms to get your book out there? Has it been an easy process? Not the actual printing, getting it printed, but as far as the e-publishing part of it, has that been a fairly straightforward, easy process?
Yeah, I worked with the studio. It's called Rocket Day. They did the interior layout of my book, and they also subsequently did the digital version that would go to Kindle and Kobo, etc. So that's hands down very simple once it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the print was a little bit more complicated. I started out with Amazon's distribution model, where I had sent books to their warehouse, and then slowly but surely people would buy it from them, and that wasn't terribly successful in terms of finances. But I've now switched over to a print-on-demand model with Amazon's CreateSpace, and that makes much more sense for me.
Okay, that does make a lot of sense. I've heard of CreateSpace. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that works?
Yeah, CreateSpace, they have the files. It's a PDF file, I believe, to the inside of my book, as well as the PDF file to the cover. Somebody places an order, and they literally print whatever quantity that person has ordered, whether it's 100 copies or simply one.
Nice. And how much marketing have you yourself had to do for the book up to this point?
Well, 100% of the marketing, because I am an indie author.
Right.
But that has varied from, writing blog posts for other platforms to social media to trying to do interviews like this. It's just a wide-ranging marketing plan. And I'm also diving into my next project. And one of the best pieces of advice I read during the marketing sort of stages of this first book was to just simply dive into your next project and continue to build your quote-unquote canon of work.
So are you writing another true-to-life story like this, or is your next project something fictional?
No, it's another nonfiction. Earlier this year, I did a 1,000-kilometer walk across Israel and Palestine. So this is the story of that journey, the people that I met, the realities of a long distance walking trip.
Daniel, man, you live an amazing, amazing life. That's nice. Wow.
Thank you.
We are definitely. So, when are you planning on having that book out?
I'm not sure yet. I'm sort of 2/3 of the way through the first draft of it.
Gotcha.
And then I need to make a decision of the type of publishing path that I want to go down. So
That is great that you already have another project in the works. And do you have any other future trips planned after you finish that project?
not at the moment. I try to keep it cyclical, where I go on some type of adventure and then I reflect upon it and then write about it. And I mean that for me would be building a really meaningful life. And it's to be honest, it doesn't necessarily pay that much, but I do client-based work to sort of keep a roof over my head.
Understood.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you are living a more you're living the life you want to live, and that amazes me. And you're able to write about it and share it with other people and kind of inspire them to go on out there and live the lives that they live. And I want to say that is a very wonderful thing that you're bringing to the indie author space, right? Because I personally believe that what happens with indie authors is that there's different types of stories that can be told, and there's more personal stories, and then there's stories that are very inspiring, especially with a lot of the nonfiction that indie authors write. It's like, hey, I'm just a regular person, but here's this amazing thing that I did as a regular person doing regular things, and yet once I did enough regular things, all of them summed up together create this magnificent whole. And that's what I'm hearing here, and that's Daniel. I mean, kudos to you. I can't wait to talk to you after you finish the other book and find out more about your trip across Israel.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but I know that my life is going to pass whether I choose to be bold and do these trips or not. So that's sort of my main philosophy behind it. So.
Not mad at that. I mean, you have to live life to the fullest. You have to enjoy yourself and enjoy the life that you live while you can. And that is a great book to be reading, to be able to read something about, read a book from someone who's basically telling you, hey, this is what I did, and you can too. All you got to do is put your mind to it. Do you have any other do you have any recommendations for other indie authors who are writing nonfiction as far as publishing and how to market themselves as well in different areas?
I mean, I think it's really important to just keep expectations in check. I had massive dreams for this book, and it's been really good. I can't say that, that I'm buying a house because of the profits of this book. In fact, it's not that way at all. But if you have a story and you feel passionate about this story and you're truthful in the writing, then I think that's a really wonderful gift that you can give to the world. In terms of the marketing piece, it's helpful to surround yourself with other writers and other like-minded thinkers, whether that's physically, like in the community where you live, or digitally through social media and the platforms that exist out there. And it's also really important to know that nobody else is going to sell your book for you. So you're ultimately your own sales agent. So you got to shout it from the rooftops.
Right. And it's funny that you mentioned the financial aspects. I think that's another thing, and you tell me how you feel about this. But that's something that I feel makes the indie publishing and the indie writing more authentic, is the fact that most indie authors, when they publish something, they do everything they're supposed to. They get it edited. They make sure they're writing great stories, great content. But then after they do all that, there's no massive financial rewards. They get some compensation, but
Yeah.
to me, I feel like indie authors really do write a little bit more just to tell that story, just to say, hey, here's a story that I have and I want to share with you, and I hope you can learn something from it and be inspired by it. Do you feel that's correct?
Yeah, for sure. And in my case, I really wanted to write the book that I wanted to write. And I didn't want to necessarily have a publisher jump in and tell me, well, maybe if we framed it this way, we could get into this demographic more, or maybe this would be a better title to nab people's attention. What it really boiled down to is me just wanting the creative freedom to make the project that I wanted to make.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Awesome. Any final words, Daniel? I know it's we're almost hit the 30-minute mark here, so any final words or anything you want to leave today's listeners with?
I mean, just a word of encouragement to keep going, to tackle your project, and then to put it out into the world and hope for the best. And it might do smashingly well, or it might not, but to maybe not let that be your ultimate determinant of what success is going to look like.
I like that, to basically determine your own success. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for your time today, Daniel. It's been wonderful, and you have a great rest of the day.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.